Here's an unusual thrift store find. A mini disc recorder. I got this Sony MDS JE500 mini disc deck for $30. If you're watching this, I'm sure you've probably at least heard of the mini disc, even if you've never actually seen one in person. But in a nutshell, it was a magneto-optical digital audio disc format introduced by Sony in 1992, which looks similar to a compact disc, except it's smaller and in this plastic caddy to protect it from dirt and fingerprints. And its main advantage at the time is that unlike a CD, you could also record to it instead of just play it. You could buy blank mini discs and make your own recordings. It was intended to replace the cassette tape, and it basically achieved that objective in its home market of Japan, where mini discs became very popular. But here in the West, it didn't fare too well because it faced competition from the digital compact cassette introduced by Philips basically at the same time as the mini disc, which was another attempt to replace the old-fashioned analog cassette, this time with basically the same thing except in digital form, with playback compatibility with your existing cassettes, which obviously a mini disc could not do, but it also retained all the negative features of tapes, such as needing to fast forward and rewind to find the song you wanted, while the mini disc has the same instant access to the tracks like a regular CD. The DCC was ultimately unsuccessful and was discontinued by Philips in 1996, while Sony persevered and continued making new mini-disc recorders and players through the 90s and 2000s. And in fact, Sony is actually still making new blank mini-discs, although they're only available in Japan. Over here in the US, mini-disc was widely regarded as a failure because, similar to Betamax videotapes, despite its technical superiority, it never gained widespread acceptance by consumers. Most people kept using their CDs and cassettes until these things came along. Nonetheless, from the mid-90s to the early 2000s here in the US, it definitely was possible to walk into an electronic store and buy a mini disc recorder and blank mini discs. And obviously somebody did, because they bought this mini disc recorder in 1996. It could have been one of these two guys who showed off their AV system in the October 1996 issue of Spin magazine, including the $600 Sony MDS JE500 minidisc recorder. They wrote, "Apparently, I'm about the only US fan of Sony's minidisc recordable digital disc format, but check it out. Records CD length and very nearly CD quality. Today's third generation MD hardware sounds much better than the first wave on a 2.5-inch optical disc, with text storage for titles and dates, plus totally cool editability. Trust me, once you use this lovely MDS JE500, you'll never want to go back to cassettes, or DAT for that matter." And to help encourage more people to adopt the mini disc format, Sony also offered the MDS JE500 recorder as part of a bundle, including an MZ-E40 portable mini disc player, headphones, and 2 blank 60-minute mini discs. By the summer of 1997, you could get that bundle for $449, or the recorder by itself for $299, while Philips was still selling off the discontinued DCC 900 recorder at the deeply discounted price of $199. And as for this one that I got at the thrift store, I'm happy to report it's working perfectly. No repairs needed. The controls are mostly similar to a CD player. You get buttons for play, pause, stop, fast forward and fast reverse. Turning this knob skips between the tracks. You get a headphone jack with a volume control. And for recording, you can select stereo or mono. You can select the digital input or the analog input, and you can set the recording level. On the back, it has standard analog line level inputs and outputs, as well as digital optical inputs and outputs. And if I take off this cap, you can actually see the little red LED in there sending out the optical digital data. And there it says Sony model number MDS-JE500, and this one was made in Japan in August 1996. And when you put in a disc, It says welcome. It's reading the table of contents. In a few seconds, it shows the title of the disc, Retro Grooves Volume 1. It shows that it has 15 tracks, and it's 69 minutes and 25 seconds long. And then when you press play, it shows the title of the track, and when the music starts, you get a level meter. Now skip to the next track. To give you a direct digital hookup of what Minidisc sounds like, I'll use my 2007 MacBook, whose 3.5mm analog line-level audio input doubles as a digital optical audio input using this special kind of connector. So I'll plug that in using this cable, which does not contain any wires. It's just a fiber optic tube, and I'll connect it to the Minidisc player's optical digital audio output. And there it is on the Mac, the optical digital in port. I'll start the Minidisc playing, and you can see on the level meter.
Your other face, your inner world concealing a silent smile of secret feeling. The you I knew through all our tears and laughter. A simple dream of joyful ever after. There is no more fear, not now, not ever.
Now I'll use this advanced digital technology to play you something very old school, a recording I made of 1070 WKMB, a little 250 watt daytime only AM radio station here in New Jersey, which in the early 2000s still had live DJs on the air taking calls from listeners, playing music from CDs and vinyl records, and playing commercials and station IDs from carts.
All work is reasonably priced and guaranteed. Give them a try at Long Hill Auto Service, 1905 Long Hill Road, Millington. Call 908-647-7984. Visit Long Hill Auto Service on the web at www.longhillauto.com.
Sterling Country.
Yes, you're listening to Sterling Country 1070 AM WKMB. I want to thank Mary, who called in, informed me that Dan Seals, who the song I played you earlier, Ball and Chain by Dan Seals, was in fact the Dan Seals of the rock duo Seals and Crofts. Thanks, Mary, for that call. Mary, it's the darndest thing. I cannot find the new Willie Nelson CD in here, so I'm going to play you a little something from The Red-Headed Stranger. It's one of my favorites from Willie. Hope it's one of yours, too. Here's Willie Nelson.
Last night I came home and I knocked on my door, and I called to my love as I oft had before.
So far that sounds very good, but Minidisc uses a form of lossy audio compression similar to MP3 called A-Track, and that's the letter A, not to be confused with one of these things, and that can cause some audible compression artifacts. So to give it something a bit more challenging, I have a test CD that I'm going to copy across to a Minidisc via a digital optical connection from this DVD player to the Minidisc recorder. I have a disc here with some blank space on it. So I'll start recording on the Minidisc and then start playing the CD.
Bass so deep and powerful it shakes your brain and rocks the neighborhood. Roller coaster swings that soar from a whisper to a scream, then back to a whisper. It's all part of the amazing dynamic range of CDs.
I do burn my CDs with CD text, but this mini disc recorder is too old to support that, so I laboriously entered the track titles one letter at a time. As for what's inside, there's just one main circuit board, which only takes up half the case, the other half is empty, and a mini disc mechanism. And of course there's another circuit board on the front panel for the controls and display. There's also a little coin cell battery on the circuit board, and it's actually still good because even with the unit unplugged, I'm still measuring about 3 volts across it. The mechanism is much more made of metal than the later models, which had a plastic frame, and it seems to use entirely gears to load and unload the disc, so it doesn't have that little belt that wears out and needs to be replaced. And this device may remind you of the head of a floppy drive, and that's because it basically is one. Like I mentioned, minidisc is a magneto-optical format, so when you're recording, it uses this magnetic head on the top in combination with the laser on the bottom, while during playback, it only uses the laser. That's why the pre-recorded music albums on minidisc that Sony initially tried selling without much success did not have this opening on the top. They only had the opening on the bottom, because they were not meant for you to be able to record on them. Unfortunately, the music albums you can get today on minidisc no longer have the production facility to make those kind of discs, so they are just made on standard recordable minidiscs, so you could actually re-record over one of these. But what some new minidiscs do to try to make up for that is they actually paint over that shutter, which I think looks really cool. I'm glad to see the renewal of interest in the minidisc format in recent years, but I have to admit that despite owning this Sony portable MZ-R37SP minidisc recorder and using it when it was new in the early 2000s, and by the way, it also still works perfectly, I never fully warmed up to the sound of Sony's 8-track codec, neither on minidisc nor in Sony's later attempts to push it as an alternative to MP3s. And instead, I took advantage of the declining market for cassette tapes by purchasing a Sony TCWE475 cassette deck at Circuit City in July 2002 at the display model price of $139, and I ended up using it much more prolifically than the minidisc recorder. And when I did want to make digital recordings, by that time CDRs had become the go-to choice because they were much more widely available and less expensive than minidiscs. And by the mid-2000s, even Japan, which had been minidisc's one big success story, eagerly switched to iPods and MP3 downloads, just like the rest of the world. So minidisc was really just a transitional format with about 1 decade of relevance from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s, because the future had long been promised to us. It was just a matter of waiting until it became a reality.
With hardware and software both lined up, compact discs may well rule the roost, at least until someone perfects a method of putting Beethoven's Ninth on a silicon chip. Don't laugh. I'm assured that day, in fact, is not too far off.
This is the end of the orientation. We hope you've enjoyed getting acquainted with your new premium quality audio system.